I'd just like to ask a little question about the relationship between the pharma partners at the point of lead optimization when you would take on a bigger role. Is the idea of the consortium that it would deliver a preclinically validated target to the consortium and then the two pharma partners would then go and develop their own compounds for clinical development, or would they develop the existing compounds that you'd identified at that point together, or would they bid for the rights to pick a target up and run with it? How would that work?
Well, I think the way we discussed it is, well, firstly, one thing that wasn't pointed out is there are various routes in which we can move forward with this, with either one pharma partner being involved or two. So just to be absolutely clear, it isn't necessary that both Eisai and Lilly are both enthusiastic about a target for it to move forward. It's obviously, we split the cost more ways. It's cheaper for us if we all 3-4 groups are involved. In terms of the back end, essentially that's the way we see it, is that if there are two pharma companies who are both interested in the output from the screen and the output from the project, is that you would end up essentially with a process of identifying who would, if you like, a bidding process to determine who would take that program forward.
I think, can I just comment on that as well? The other thing that was, I think, important for us when we went put this together was that there are all sorts of reasons why pharma companies won't take something on. And they may not be in a position to tell us what those are. One of it could be actually the portfolio's full and we don't have the money to develop it. All sorts of reasons actually. And so there is a sidearm there, which is if there's compelling evidence that this is going to be a very interesting target, that AR UK together with MRCT and the academic, there is a parallel process which we could still take things forward. So there is tremendous flexibility built into this process. And just something around intellectual property, which I think is important, is often missed. Earlier I was chatting to Mike and we both remembered a project we were involved in many, many years ago, which was to try and find a gene. And we had a very strong consortium, but we did argue about the intellectual property for a year and a half. And in the end, we ended up with 100% of nothing because another organisation cloned the gene before us. So you have to put sort of intellectual property into perspective, I think. We want to be fair about everything, fair to the academic partners and fair to pharma. But we don't want to get obsessed about it because it could just destroy any innovation.
It's worth pointing out as well, when it comes to patents on specific molecules, is that pharma will, generally speaking, protect those at a later stage than this anyway. It won't be until you get to sort of the clinical candidate type of stage that a patent would be filed. And of course, part of the reason for that is the more time that the earlier you have the patent, then the less time you have once you get into the clinic to actually raise revenue on that molecule.
So just a practical question which might affect other people as well. I think this whole concept of the collaborative thing and being able to discuss the project and bring it backwards and forwards is just brilliant and a huge improvement over how we generally try and apply to things at the moment. We're in a situation which some other people might be in of having mouse models which belong to a drug company where we have an MTA with that drug company, a drug company not involved here. And we've done a lot of stuff with those animals. I think that some of the things that are the ideas that are coming out of that would fit this absolutely perfectly. They no longer really fund neuroscience in any much at all, but certainly not much in academia. And so we have animals which have an MTA on them to another company. We don't have funding from them to do anything with those animals. Is there any way that that sort of thing can fit into this consortium?
I think this is one for you, Duncan, actually.
Well, I guess that's the point where we could look at approaching UCLB, your tech transfer office, to look at just how restrictive the MTA is, what scope there is to use the results you're generating from those animals and still explore it within this context. I think it's going to depend on the MTA, and that's something we can look into, I suppose. But even potentially go and approach the company on the back of that with UCLB to see if there is a way we can still progress it.
Because another approach to that would then be to get a parallel animal model that was not belonging to that company, and I wonder whether there'd be scope for funding. The animals are always the thing that limit these things, the expense of animals. So for us to go out and get a new animal model is almost, it's a huge thing to fund.
Yeah, I mean, often actually companies, believe it or not, are quite reasonable about these things, and if they're not working in the area, they may well sub-license some of that to someone else who is working in the area, is the first point. The other point is, so long as you're not contravening any prior arrangements you've made, although there may, we may not have the animal model in hand, it may be available in a CRO, it may be available in a different academic group. It may be that we don't need that animal model because we can measure engagement at the target in another way. So again, rather than think, certainly do not think it can't be done. It may not be feasible, but really come and talk to us, and if you have some great ideas, we'd love to explore all avenues, because ultimately, I mean, this is something I sort of really do believe, there are patients out there who need this, and so one would hate that to get tied up in some agreement that would frustrate that.
I'd agree with that completely. I think I'd stress there's almost always ways to additional ways to address a problem like target validation. It's rare that you're absolutely stuck with data from a single model.
But
actually, if you are stuck with just a single model, that's a bit of a risk as well, because yeah, okay, yeah.
I note that the current application round is limited to small molecules and antibodies. Will there be another round where gene therapies would be looked into, and also is the big pharma industry interested in gene therapies?
It's not limited, so I hope Duncan made clear that that's a starting point. That's what MRCT have tremendous expertise in, but they will have access to CROs that may have that capability. So again, don't restrict yourself. Now, it could well be that this is well out of scope for Eisai and Lilly, and that they will tell us in a moment, but it may not be out of scope for MRCT and AI UK. So again, rather than think we can't do it, we'd much prefer to hear your ideas, but I'll hand over to...
In terms of additional modalities, I'd say we'll look at it on a case-by-case basis. I mean, anti-sense approaches, for example, is one that we've played around with as an idea. We don't have anything in that space right now, but I certainly would be open with the right application.
So it's very much the same. It's not something we have a focus on at the moment, but if the data is convincing.
I got to say similar kind of question, like if you have a small molecule or antibody, which is you patent your own, right? But when you're testing to animal model, you need more than maybe 2 or 3 models. And means with the experience I see, when you apply for a pilot grant, it's such a small amount of money, you cannot carry on that project, right? But if with you, like 100,000 maybe not enough to do an animal study. So will you bear that cost of the animal study in this case? And you will share what is, because the small funding is very difficult to test the animal models.
Without knowing the specifics around the project, and also potentially the supporting in vitro data or maybe cell-based data you have, it's difficult to give an answer to that. But again, talk to us. You saw that there was a notional limit of $500,000 for this. It would really depend on the particular project, the experiment, and how far forward in terms of the evolution of understanding of that target that experiment would take us.
But to be clear, I mean, again, I agree it's on a case-by-case basis, but in general what we're thinking here is that you already have evidence for the target being involved, and we're actually facilitating the screening, the drug discovery process, rather than funding additional evidence for support of that target. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, it depends on the specifics.
Yeah. I was just wondering, based on your presentations, it's just a practical question. I'm a postdoc, obviously, and I'd hope to kind of push forward ideas with my PI. Is there any potential for provision of staff costs within your grant applications?
And it's worth bearing in mind, and I guess for the previous question as well, I mean, AI UK still funds staff costs and project grants and so on, and we'd hope that there could be some transitioning potentially between a relationship between project grants funded by AI UK and this consortium. But wasn't really designed with staff costs in mind, I'm afraid.
You talked about overseas applicants, and I wasn't quite clear if they were applying to a UK scheme, say a researcher in the US, or if there's somehow a global scheme that is part of the Dementia Consortium. Could Dr. Curran clarify?
Yeah. I mean, our perspective on this is that essentially we are providing a big funnel for stuff to go in, and the more stuff that goes in at the top, we hope the more stuff will come out at the bottom. And so this is open to great ideas from around the world.
But it's a UK scheme.
Would you define that?
Well, money that is located within this country.
Yeah. Except, I guess, Eisai and Lilly are global companies.
But yes, it's brought together by companies and the research activities happening in the UK, but we're open to academics coming from wherever they are.
Presumably, all the successful applications will be funded as investigator-led studies rather than pharma-sponsored. And I wonder whether this would preclude the possibility that we might ask for pharmacological tools that not necessarily is the lead compound, the lead asset in development, but still compounds that maybe can be tested for human use, just as a proof of concept, proof of mechanism. I wonder whether Eisai and Lilly would have considered the possibility of giving molecules that can be tested as part of this part of this consortium, where essentially two companies are involved. Would they be prepared to give away compounds for an investigator-led study? And if so, this is back to the previous comment about intellectual property, how this would be managed.
You're talking about a repurposing sort of
approach. So where the application essentially, rather just in terms of funding, is an application where there is also a request for a molecule, to access a molecule, to test that particular molecule.
To be absolutely clear, for a clinical study, for us, that would be out of scope for this. I mean, we're very much.
But even for preclinical studies, imagine, because I mean, still there might be a compound that is in development. I mean, after candidate selection, you might choose one compound for further development, but you have a series of compounds that can still be tested for testing an hypothesis.
I mean, again, I think there might be opportunities there because this is a consortium, and that would, of course, then be a part of the consideration when you came to the back end of the deal. So, from our perspective, I guess if there were suitable molecules that were in existence for a particular target, there might be an opportunity to collaborate.
And the fact that there is another company involved in the consortium will represent a conflict or a stopping point. The fact that, I mean, you as Lilly might give away that molecule to the investigator as part of a consortium where another company is involved as well in the same consortium. That was essentially my main point, whether there is any issue in terms of intellectual property.
I think it would be very unlikely that Eisai and Lilly would co-develop a program to the level where there is a human-ready compound, which would presumably involve 2 weeks tox minimum in 2 species, unless Eisai and Lilly are going to merge their R&D groups. I think that's unlikely. To the question about doing POC studies with molecules that have the required attributes to go into man, that toxicology is known, etc., then Alzheimer's Research UK are interested in seeing those proposals, and we will attempt to be funding some of those discrete POCs outside of this consortium.